The following program is transcribed. Dorothy Kilgallen's Diary, the intimate behind-the-scenes story of Broadway's great stars, revealed by the First Lady of Broadway, the famous columnist and radio personality, Dorothy Kilgallen.
Thank you, Walter Hurley. My diary yesterday shows I spent the afternoon with a very fine mother and her cute baby daughter. If that little girl takes after her mother, she'll really have a voice, because the fond parent's name is Mary Small. You know, that name, Mary Small, is a mighty familiar one to a great many GIs, and for a very good reason. Mary, as you know, is a famous singing star, but you may not know she's entertained GI audiences at Army camps here in this country, such as Camp Dix and Camp Shanks, that she's brightened up many a hospital patient in military institutions, such as Halloran in the New York area, and in Louisville, Kentucky, and in Pittsburgh, and many more places. She really puts her heart in those performances.
You can say that again, Dorothy Kilgallen. I can't say just how those vocals sound, but I know that I never tried so hard to really sell a number.
Mary, you've entertained at so many camps and hospitals. What would you say was the most touching experience you've had?
Well, it's hard to choose, but I'd say it was the time our company was appearing at a hospital down in Louisville. I was going to sing before a group of soldiers who were heading overseas. This was their last entertainment for a long time in the good old USA. Before I went on to do my numbers, their commanding officer gave a speech. He told them to make good use of their training, and then he closed with these words. Men, you know as well as I, some of you will not be coming back. But I know from having worked with you that you're ready and willing to pay that price for freedom. Well, after that, I was it. That is, I had to sing the farewell song, and I had such a lump in my throat, I don't know how I got the song out.
Mary, in visiting our military hospitals, you must have seen how far our bond dollars go to buy the finest medical care and attention.
Yes, Dorothy, I certainly did. You take the one time when I was entertaining in a hospital in the South. After I'd gotten through with my regular show, one of the nurses said to me, Miss Small, there are 2 patients who missed your show because they weren't well enough to be in the auditorium. Maybe you could sing them just one song? I said yes, naturally, and when I got inside the ward, I saw these 2 men lying there smiling at me. I said, what number would you like? And one of them grinned and said, will you sing I Had a Little Talk with the Lord? Well, that was strange in a way, because that song was written by a very special friend of mine, his name, Vic Mizzy. So I was happy to tell them, boys, I'm glad you asked for one of my husband's songs.
Mary, speaking of your husband, Vic Mizzy, you didn't mention that he served in the Navy.
That's right, as an assistant chaplain. That's how I got to singing in chapel at several of the Navy bases here in this country. You know, it was pretty different from doing some jazz number over the air, but I wouldn't trade that experience for the best radio contract in the world.
I'm sure you wouldn't, Mary, and I'm glad you've spoken about what victory bonds mean to you. Of course, there's another aspect to it, and that is, in addition to buying all the things needed for medical help, these bonds represent a sound, common-sense investment. So it's a case where patriotism and good hard sense go hand in hand. Why, do you realize $4 come back to you for every $3 in E-bonds held to maturity? Of course, even if that weren't so, every American would want to get behind this victory drive because it helps care for our wounded.
And helps bring our boys back home.
Right, Mary Small. And buying victory bonds helps pay off and provide benefits for the 8 million veterans to be discharged by next July. So all in all, who can say no to the suggestion, buy that extra victory bond? I'm sure that you, Mary Small, after seeing those bond dollars at work, will answer a great big yes.
Thank you, Mary Small, and thank you, Dorothy Kilgallen, for showing us your diary. Now, this is Walter Hurley saying, we won the war. Secure the peace with victory bonds. The following program is transcribed. Dorothy Kilgallen's Diary, the intimate behind-the-scenes story of Broadway's great stars, revealed by the First Lady of Broadway, the famous columnist and radio personality, Dorothy Kilgallen.
Thank you, Walter Hurley. My diary shows I had a lot of fun the other night. I went with some friends to one of the New York hotels because a band leader I knew was opening an engagement there. His name, Shep. During an intermission, he told me he'd just come back from the most thrilling trip he'd ever taken. He and the men in his band just returned from playing before GI audiences in France and Germany. To look at him, you'd have thought Shep and his men had been on a vacation. But don't imagine that they didn't work hard. They entertained thousands of men and in a very short time.
As a matter of fact, Dorothy, Just to keep the record straight, we played to almost 1 million men in 8 weeks.
You certainly did get around. You must have gotten a real first-hand picture of how our fighting forces are being taken care of. I'm sure all our listeners with relatives over there would be interested, especially those whose loved ones may have been injured.
Well, Dorothy, I learned one thing right off the bat, and it made a big impression on me. We visited a splendidly furnished hospital in Stuttgart. I walked in, looked around, expecting to find some seriously injured men. But I was surprised to find that on the whole they weren't anything like as serious injuries I'd seen playing before hospital audiences back in America. I asked the nurse why. She said, "Well, Mr. Fields, we have evacuated all such cases as can be moved. They are being cared for in the hospitals back home in America."
Isn't that wonderful? Well, Shep, after playing to so many GI audiences, both here and overseas, you ought to have a good idea about the musical likes and dislikes of our veterans.
In general, I'd say they are about like any other average group of Americans. They like their music both sweet and hot. But there's one exception to that.
Well, what do you mean, Shep?
You take the boys who have been injured more seriously. I know a bit about them because our band toured quite a few hospitals here in the States. Each place we struck, we'd play our regular performance with a full band in the hospital auditorium. After that came the job that was the biggest thrill of all. We made up a 6-piece combination, called ourselves the Short Snorters, and used to go around playing in the wards. We'd walk in, grouped together there among the beds. I'd say, "Well, men, what'll it be? Anything from Bach to Boogie Woogie. You name it, we'll play it."
And what do they ask for?
Believe it or not, Dorothy, it was always a sentimental ballad. They just liked to hear songs about the American girl waiting for them back in their hometown. Novelty numbers and rhythm tunes didn't seem to interest patients like that.
Well, Shep, what sort of thing do they tell you, these men who have sacrificed so much in the fight for freedom?
I think I can answer that best by telling you what one corporal had to say. I asked him how he felt about getting back here in America and being nursed back to health. He looked up at me and said, "Mr. Fields, I don't think there's anything particularly heroic about it. Seems like every good American fought this war the best way he could. Those of us who had to stay at home pitched in and did their job. Those of us who were able to go overseas did our job over there. Now we're back, and we can all work together here at home to make this peace last."
That was really a very wonderful thought, Shep. And I can only think of one thing to say next to those men who fought for us and for all America overseas. They finished their job, let's finish ours. And that means get out and buy those victory bonds, every single bond you can afford. And when you've done that, buy another. That's the message Shep Fields and I would like to leave with you now.
Thank you, Shep Fields, and thank you, Dorothy Kilgallen, for showing us your diary. Now this is Walter Hurley saying, help bring the boys home. Buy and hold victory bonds. The following program is transcribed. Dorothy Kilgallen's diary. The intimate behind-the-scenes